Welcome to Chautauqua People. I'm John V. My guest today is Ted First. He's a long-term, year-round resident of Chautauqua Institution. He grew up in State College, Pennsylvania, did his undergraduate work at the University of Pennsylvania, and graduate work at Goddard College in Vermont. He's an architect, designer, who's been involved with numerous projects at Chautauqua. He's a very active member of the Quaker community. Ted, how did you learn about designing and constructing buildings?
Well, first of all, I'm not technically an architect. I'm a builder designer. I really fell into it. I got married very young with a couple of kids. My wife and I wanted to build community. We started a school in the woods of State College outside the town. And I fell in love with construction and ended up not being a teacher so much as someone who was interested in community. And just got involved in building first to try to make money to support the school and really became aware of the kind of values that I wanted to express through that design. And it was 1973. The oil embargo had hit. Energy prices were doubling and tripling, and I began to look at the responsibility we had to build an energy-saving, sustainable, smart house. And I got started with solar design, and I've spent my life as a builder in trying to, fulfill those kind of values.
What were some of the early examples which were influential in forming your ideas about design?
Well, I grew up in the countryside of Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Bank Barn expresses a lot of the principles.
Can we see what one looks like?
Sure. Can we do that?
I think we've got one ready to go.
Okay. So the banked barn was, first of all, something that faced south.
Faces south.
So it's a solar passive collector, and you'll notice that the upper floor is overhung over the lower one. The cows are in the stone basement bottom, and that overhang keeps the summer sun out and keeps that cool. By digging out a modest amount of dirt into the hillside and banking it on the back on the north side, they're protecting the building from the wind and from the north shadow of the snow that builds up. At the same time, it's a access for the tractor to bring the hay up and store it up above. The hay becomes super insulation, an easy process then of dropping it down to feed the cows. The cows are going to put out enough energy to heat themselves, and the barn has an enormous ceiling with lots of ventilation built into it. It's built out of wood from the local area and stone, so it's a completely renewable resource with no real carbon footprint at all. And when you look at the modern equivalent of a concrete barn with a metal building with a lot of cows in there, they have to have a lot of power fans. They have really problems with viruses and colds in that environment. And so it requires a lot of sort of medicine to maintain that. And it's concrete and aluminum and steel is not a renewable resource. So it's a pretty heavy, intensive carbon footprint. I'm not suggesting that we go back to the Pennsylvania Bank Barn, but certainly that we pay attention to those principles.
Right.
It's doable.
Right. Now, what else? With cliff dwellings?
Mesa Verdes, another example from the Native Americans who lived in a very different climate, in a very, very harsh climate. And they built, again, solar passive. They built into the north bank of the cliff and used the cliff itself to carve out their home and in a vertical thing to maximize the amount of solar collection they could get out of that. And it provided, again, a sustainable, low impact, environmentally sensitive kind of building style. And those were inspiring to me as examples.
And the cliff dwelling you showed was from Arizona or what state?
Mesa Verde, I believe, is in New Mexico.
New Mexico, close.
Yeah.
One state off. Okay. Now, were any architects particularly influential in developing your ideas?
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Okay.
Frank Lloyd Wright, all of his designs paid attention to local materials, to environmental, to solar passive, and his ability and his design ability was phenomenal, just in terms of creating space and creating light and connecting the inside and the outside. Very livable spaces.
I know we have the Great Cliff, which is close to here, and that's always worth a visit.
And falling water.
Yeah. By all means. Now, how did you learn about designing and constructing buildings? Did you
I was self-taught. The first building I put up was our home, and then we were putting up school buildings next to that. And I literally, back in the 70s, I looked at the Whole Earth catalog, and there was someone who was advertising pole building construction, and something that had to be very inexpensive. We just bought all the wood from a local sawmill. I hired a carpenter who was sort of a jack of all trades, knew electrical and plumbing, and said, I'm going to work for you, teach me everything you know. And that was my education, was hands-on. Very simple building, pole buildings with handmade windows and doors, and then I had to spend the next 10 years rebuilding a lot of it, just to sort of bring it up to good standards.
Right. Did we get a picture of that?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see if we can see that.
Right, okay.
The house here.
So, and then I began to modify that house and test out some of the...
And that's this. Is it?
Yeah, and that has a solar collector that was a homemade one on the roof that you can kind of see there. And it had a wood stove. I was heating with wood for probably the first 10 years of my life, and we then converted that wood stove into a water-jacketed circulator that heated a 2,000-gallon tank that was simply built out of stressed plywood panels and rubber, that the collector could heat when the sun was out, and the wood stove could heat it when you ran it at night. And then you could use that hot water for both domestic hot water and for heat. And that was sort of an early prototype of sort of putting together hybrid systems of solar passive and active, and backup with a wood system. And maybe we can see another picture of that process developing into a more commercial product.
Okay.
And there's one that shows both a greenhouse of glass on the upper right side and a solar collector. This is also bermed into the ground. And these houses work very well, but interest rates went up, things got expensive, and all this glass and other materials used a lot of materials that in themselves required a lot of consumption. And so the emphasis began to evolve on more super insulation, airtight, better products, better materials, and that's where we evolved. And I also then connected up with Habitat for Humanity. I was a volunteer with them for 35 years, and we began to build in Chautauqua County super insulated, airtight houses, and basically they heat themselves. The heat loss is so minimal. Now, to make it healthy, you have to put in an air-to-air heat exchanger. So you blow out sterile air, blow in clean, fresh air, and through the process, you recover a lot of the heat that you're blowing out. So you don't lose that. So you can literally design airtight and maintain healthy indoor air quality at the same time.
Got it. Let's switch gears a little bit. You talked about Chautauqua County. How did you make your way to Chautauqua?
Well, I was living in State College. It's not that far away, and we were supporting a young candidate who was running in office, and he was having a fundraiser up at Chautauqua, and Peter, Paul, and Mary were here the same night, and we thought, well, that'll be fun, and we can go up and support him. It turns out that he was running against a really good friend of mine and a past chairman of the board at Chautauqua, Bill Klinger. And
Was Bill Klinger a friend at the time?
not a friend at the time, no, I didn't know Bill, but I got onto the CPOA, the Property Owners Association, with you, and later on the board, and was introduced to the board in that sort of inoculation they have with new people, and tell your story of how you came to Chautauqua. And Bill Klinger introduced me, and I was describing how I had come here in opposition to his running for office. And then we became very good friends, and yeah, I miss Bill. He's a great guy.
And he sat at the table where you are now some years ago, and we had a wonderful interview. And
Yeah.
I still have people asking about it. And one this weekend who earlier in the week asked about it and sent her a copy to see. Now, let's go back, and the term integrated design is used. We are now at Chautauqua, building these houses, different model than the glass and other ones from State College. Tell us a little about integrated design. I think you may have touched on that.
Well, that's the fun part, really. That's apart from the green build or the solar. That was an influence that Frank Lloyd Wright had on me. He would come up with every house for his client. He'd come up with a theme, a name for what the house meant to them, and he would then express that meaning of the house and what it was into the design and integrate it in all aspects so that the moldings and the furniture and the structural elements all sort of flowed together. And I had a chance to do a house like that. And the theme of the house was North Point. Well, the family was coming north. And so the compass direction and the North Point and the symbol of that got reflected all through the house in stained glass windows and in motifs in the design, just reiterated all over the place and all integrated like a piece of furniture. And I think we have a picture of that.
Let's see if we do.
Yeah, and there's a representation of that. The North Point being abstracted into different figures and lines in the glass and in the ceilings, and just that's the art form. That's also a fun part. And
I can see the arrows and the sliding glass doors there.
Yeah.
And where else are there the pointers?
They're in the fascia and the soffit work on the outside. They're in a medallion that's inset into the floor. They're in lights that were designed for the exterior entry lights. They just keep getting reiterated again and again.
That's magnificent.
Yeah.
That's magnificent.
Yeah.
Now, one more switch of gears here. We got a couple more coming. You are active in several contemporary projects at Chautauqua. And we heard about this name, Phyllis Wheatley, coming up.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about Phyllis and wire it into some projects if you can?
Well, Phyllis Wheatley came to my attention really through my wife's work of years ago. She and Laura Damon were doing a project on ladies, learners, and leaders, women at Chautauqua. And in the archives at this time, and this was 20 years ago, they came across the Phyllis Wheatley house, which was in the vernacular in that day, which we don't say today, but it was called the colored boarding house, which was built around 1900 at Chautauqua. And they were just amazed at this. They had no idea that such a thing existed. But when early Chautauquans, wealthy ones, came to the grounds with their servants, they would stay with them. But not all of them had enough room. And so the question came, and we don't know, we're still digging into the archival research, but they decided to build this specifically for African Americans, people of color, this colored boarding house. But they named it Phyllis Wheatley, and Phyllis Wheatley had nothing to do with Chautauqua. Phyllis Wheatley was an 18th century slave, a young girl of 7 years old who by herself disembarked from the Phyllis slave ship, and a Mr. Wheatley in Boston bought her and brought her back to be a servant for his wife who was homeschooling their children. And Phyllis turned out to be just a genius in her own right. She mastered the entire English language in all its written form in 18 months at the young age of 9 or 10, and went on to be one of the foremost poets and one of the first female poets to be published at that time. How Chautauqua decided to name a segregated house after Phyllis Wheatley, we don't know, but it's one of the gifts, the irony, the twists of history that they would distinguish the house with that name. And there's a plaque on the grounds, and the African American House is uncovering a fascinating and rich history of African Americans at Chautauqua, particularly in the early years, that's really quite commendable. And they have just purchased a house on Scott and will be presenting their archival work in storyboards this summer.
Great.
So it'll be available.
Great. Now, what were the traveling Chautauquas, and how did Phyllis Wheatley fit into those?
Well, part of the research showed us that in the very first class of CLSC, which I think got started, Vincent and Miller were both committed to education. They started that a few years after Chautauqua got started in the late 1870s. The first class was maybe 1882, and there was an African American in that graduating class of 1,000, and probably more.
1,000?
There were 1,000 graduates in that class, and it was a 3-year program equivalent to college level work. The CLSC just hit the country at that point just right. The access to learning, it's like we have Zoom in remote work today. And the book clubs spread like wildfire all over the country. And then to feed that demand for that, because not everybody could come to Chautauqua to back it up, they developed the Chautauqua circuits, where they went out around the country in these wagons, trains, whatever, and would set up in an area a series of tents that would maybe serve a radius of 50. And their speakers and performers could then travel on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, rotate around and service the circuit. And then the circuits wanted more. And so they developed their own local Chautauquas. And between 1900 and 1920, Chautauqua impacted 50 million Americans.
50 million.
And there was an African-American Chautauqua in, I believe, Kentucky. And there were many African-American book clubs, CLSC book clubs. We didn't ever uncover this information. It's fascinating history. And the archival research, the African-American Heritage House is continuing this research.
So did these visiting Chautauquans or local ones have Phyllis Wheatley houses or something of the sort?
I don't know. I don't think so. I have no idea. That might have been a particular thing of what happened here because of the people bringing their servants here. But I have no idea how they handled that in other parts of the country.
But indeed, that was a part in the fact that African-American Chautauquas, I never knew that until our face-to-face like this.
Right.
I thought I had a pretty good understanding of the history of the institution.
Yeah.
Now, another project you're involved with is Homeboys.
Right.
Tell me about them.
Well, Father Greg Boyle has been coming to Chautauqua on and off for, 15, 20 years. Mm-hmm. And he's a really inspirational and charismatic man who's founded the largest gang recovery and rehabilitation, recovery and reentry program in the world. And there's a long story on how he got to LA and into the gangs in the 1980s. But what he has essentially done is through a program of 18 months of internship in counseling and tattoo removal and anger management and addiction reduction and job training. But the real thing that he talks about is a kind of radical and abundant tenderness in something that is, in his words, he says to these gang guys, you are exactly the person God wanted you to be. And there's such a powerful affirmation that for them to put all their pieces back together, it's just a powerful testimony. Well, I kept running into him in LA and at Chautauqua and said to him, why not bring the Homeboys to Chautauqua, not as presenters, but just as people for a vacation? They're working hard. They deserve a chance to have something like that as well. And so we got to that point, and they've now been coming. I think we're in our 7th year of their coming to Chautauqua. And he said the fact that they can come out of LA and go through this transformational growth and then come to Chautauqua and have it affirmed has been a very, very powerful opportunity for them, and something that he wants all his senior staff and sort of graduates to experience. So this week we've expanded it to 3 weeks, and Father Greg Boyle will be the minister in residence for week 4. And we announced there was going to be a brown bag presentation of their telling their stories, and the little hall at one of the chapels was overflowing with 75 people. The word got out, we ran it again, and by the end of the week we must have had 800 Chautauquans that were gathering to hear their stories. They have, anybody who's had the road of growing up through the gangs, through the jails, through the prison system, and has put their life back together, has a lot to teach all of us.
They certainly do. They certainly do. And I admire you for that. Now, we know that Greg Boyle brought us along with this. And if we look at our contemporary practices, you've also been involved in the Quaker community at Chautauqua.
Yes.
So could you tell me a little bit about Quakers?
Sure.
As a Pennsylvanian, and then the ultimate thing is to Talk about 28 Ames.
Well, the Quakers are actually technically called the Religious Society of Friends.
Got it.
And they came out of the sort of Enlightenment in England that didn't happen in the Reformation sort of movement, and they're kind of the mystical end of Christianity. Their authority for the truth is based on their own experience. And as a society, they test out that experience and support each other. They've always been at Chautauqua. They were here, 1,000 of them were here in 1900, of various kinds of Quaker groups for education, for women's rights, for peace and justice work. And in the process of coming to Chautauqua, they came together and had a kind of a vision of creating a national conference, Friends General Conference, which now meets every year. But the birth of that was here at Chautauqua. The Quaker meeting at Chautauqua, I know, was here for at least 40 years in the Octagon. And just 5 or 6 years ago, as Chautauqua expanded and CLSC moved back into the Octagon, the Quakers then began to move around to trying to find another home for their worship. And there just ended up being no space. After getting a stint at Alumni Hall and the Unitarians helped out, we were without a home. And we were fortunate enough to have a support come along and help us purchase a house at 28 Ames, which, John, has something to do with your family. Your uncle, John Vehe, and Mary Louise were the owners of that home. And you could give us some comments on that. But just let me say, first of all, that John and Mary Louise, I had met.
Carl,
I'm sorry, Carl.
No problem.
I had met them coincidentally about 20 years earlier as part of the Chautauqua Peace Society. And they were just magnanimous and dedicated and just silent but strong in their support for that. And it's just been a wonderful connection to have their work and their presence and their work in the Peace Society be our home now on Ames. So you've got to feel good about that.
Yeah, and I look at our family records, and I hope we can bring up the house at 28 Ames so people take a look at it. Here it is.
Yeah.
And I spent many a nice night in that house and dinner parties and sitting on the front porch. And it's typical of a Chautauqua house, is it not?
Very, yeah.
Okay.
We did a little modification. We took out the wall between the dining room and the living room to open it up and give us a place where we could gather up to 40, and pushed it out onto the side porch on just the lower level. The upper level porch still wraps around. We added handicapped access and a handicapped access bathroom. And now we're in the process of beginning to winterize it, and it can envision that we'll have some activity year-round. And we're growing.
What is the summer program like at the house?
We have a friend in residence who does hospitality, and we also have Friends of the Week. We are bringing in Quakers who have done some dedicated and outstanding work in their own witness to spend a week to share their spiritual journey and to be there to comment on the program of the week and the themes, and develop dialogue with the people that are in the house, sort of build community within the house. The Quaker House has become now the sponsor of Homeboys coming to Chautauqua, and we'll be looking forward to partnering with the African American Heritage House in some of their programming.
Okay, yeah. And this summer, will the African American Heritage House be in their own building, or will they be?
We had rented space on Clark Avenue before we knew we were going to be able to purchase this house, and we're going to be in both locations and using the summer to evolve whatever improvements we need to make to our more permanent location on Scott. So,
your first pass, this is obviously not a commitment. Will the house on Scott require a lot of work?
No, the good thing about the house is that it's not completely adequate on the first floor, and it doesn't have the large Chautauqua porch, but the neighboring empty lot came with the house. So we have plenty of first floor room to build a great porch and expand. And I'm not sure we'll do that in the second year, but probably by the third. And we'll have to also do handicap accessibility, meet code, any things that are required, handicap bathroom, those kinds of things.
So as a designer, then you've got some flexibility with additional space to come up with some good solutions.
It's good. We have the time and the way to evolve in a measured way.
Right. Now, this is a big issue, and one more Quaker point. What does a Quaker service look like? Those who've never been to a Quaker worship service.
Well, the Quakers gather, some people would call it meditation. They gather in silence, but it's really a focused meditation on learning to listen to the voices that really call us into unity and call us into love and peace. And we sit and obviously our own life has its own stirring and its own struggles and opportunities. And we look to be informed by those sort of transcendent voices, and then we share, if we so called upon, we share the truth that we hear, that we bring to bear on that. And then we try to hold each other accountable to live out that witness, to be more than just words and thoughts, but to put that into action. And Quakers in Western New York are very involved in projects in the Middle East, in the Polynesian countries, in outreach in Africa, in prison, all over the state of New York. The Alternatives to Violence in Prison program that goes in and connects with prisoners and does conflict resolution training is now spread all over the world. So we're a tiny group of people, but we have proportionally a lot of witness in the world.
Mm-hmm. One last question. What projects are you currently working on besides the renovation for the house for the African American community?
Well, my wife and I share a lot of this, and for 25 years we've been traveling to the Middle East, working with an Israeli Jewish and Palestinian village, Neve Shalom Lahatas Salam in Israel. And it's a small country over there. It's just 20 minutes from the West Bank, where there's a large Quaker school and a Quaker meeting. And one of the programs I started was a summer camp for the Palestinian high school diaspora around the world to come back and have an experience with their homeland. Mm-hmm. High school students coming back to be immersed in the language, the home, the projects, the culture, the political conflict, the challenges, the music, all of that. And I'm now in the 11th year of that, and it's a great success. We have a lot of cross-border kinds of things we try to do to just try to make, I think once you bring people of differences together in proximity and they begin to talk, then the walls break down. Mm-hmm. and you can build a sort of connections.
What time of year to go back to Palestine? Is it the summer?
Oh, well, the summer gets really hot.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going in 2 weeks, and it'll be kind of hot then. But yeah. And there's tension everywhere in the world now. But that's sitting home and being afraid is no way to solve the problem.
That's right. That's right. You're to be congratulated for it.
I
remember a few years ago walking by the Gold Dome mosque and saw the horrors. Yeah. Outside that just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I know. So, it's tragic.
Yeah. I just have to congratulate you for the hard work you've done and the contribution to Chautauqua. A bazillion things I'd love to talk about, but we are out of time.
Okay, well, it's been a joy.
Yeah, anything else we need to add?
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you and everybody else on the grounds for what we hope is close to normal season.
And I'll give you some stories about 28 Ames.
Okay, I love it.
This has been fun. Do come back.
Thank you.
Righto.
Right.
Bye-bye.